Hello, Silverwood followers. Following Adrian's icy warning, Eleanor Hartwell has declared war for her family. There is no turning back now. So, what will Eleanor's first move be in this silent war? Will this crucial initial move secure victory, or will she risk everything she has? Will the predictions you made in the comments prove correct? The war that will determine the future of Silverwood Manor is starting now. Keep watching.
The next morning, Silverwood Manor seemed peaceful. Mist rolled gently over the manicured lawns and sunlight spilled through the tall windows, illuminating the hallways with its golden warmth. Yet beneath the serene surface, Eleanor felt a pulse of unease. The previous evening's confrontation had left her mind racing. Adrian's warning lingered, cold and sharp, like the edge of a knife pressed to her spine. She moved through the rooms, observing everything. Each painting, each antique vase, each glimmering chandelier held a story, a history, a value Adrian would kill to claim. Eleanor's gaze lingered on the grand desk in her study, the drawers lined with carefully kept documents, wills, financial statements, deeds and trust papers. Her wealth, her daughter's inheritance, was meticulously catalogued, and she knew that Adrian's charm masked an appetite for it. Clara arrived shortly, carrying a tray with steaming tea and delicate pastries. Her laughter echoed through the hall, blissfully unaware of the storm gathering around her. Eleanor smiled faintly, but it did not reach her eyes. She poured the tea for them both, carefully avoiding eye contact with her daughter's fiancé, who had arrived unannounced, claiming he wanted to help with the morning routine. Adrian's eyes flicked around the room, taking in the arrangement of furniture, the placement of decorative items, and the way Eleanor moved through the space. Subtle, almost imperceptible, his attention lingered on the study, where her documents lay waiting. Eleanor noticed the way he tilted his head slightly as if calculating. He felt a chill. His surveillance had begun. Over the next few days, Eleanor watched him closely. Adrian's behavior had shifted subtly. He was attentive, polite, almost disarmingly charming, but every movement, every glance carried purpose. He lingered in hallways longer than necessary, studied the layout of the rooms and asked seemingly innocent questions about minor details of the estate. How often the staff changed the linens, the schedule of deliveries, even the security routines. At first, Eleanor dismissed these as the curious questions of a man integrating into a new household. But the seed of suspicion once planted had grown roots that could not be ignored. That evening, Eleanor summoned Samuel Rourke to the manor. Samuel, a long-trusted friend and investigator, arrived under the guise of inspecting the estate's security system, though Eleanor had another reason in mind: to observe Adrian's behavior when he thought no one was watching. Samuel had been invaluable before, uncovering Adrian's past and confirming the web of deceit that hung over him like a shadow. Adrian arrived shortly after Samuel. Clara, radiant in her engagement glow, was excited to introduce her fiancé to Samuel, whom she had met briefly before. Adrian's charm shifted into overdrive, shaking hands with practiced warmth, complimenting the furniture, and praising Eleanor for the careful upkeep of her home. Yet even as he smiled, Samuel's trained eyes noted subtle signs: the quick scanning of the room, the barely perceptible tensing of muscles whenever Eleanor moved toward sensitive areas, and the fleeting glance toward the study when he thought no one was paying attention. After tea, Eleanor proposed a tour of the estate. Adrian agreed readily, as if eager to show he had nothing to hide. Eleanor took careful note of the areas he lingered near: the library, which housed some of the manor's oldest financial records, the study where her personal papers were kept, and the room where her safe was hidden. Adrian's fingers occasionally brushed against the edges of cabinets or door frames, his touch casual, yet Eleanor felt the intent behind every movement. Once they were back in the drawing room, Eleanor and Samuel exchanged a quiet glance. It was time to act. "I think it's clear," she whispered to Samuel. "He's studying the estate. Watching, learning, planning." Samuel nodded. "He's careful but not clever enough to hide it completely. We need to monitor him more closely. Every step he takes should be observed." Eleanor felt a surge of determination. Adrian's presence in her home was no longer a matter of charm or courtship. It was surveillance. He had crossed the invisible line between guest and predator. She could no longer rely solely on intuition. She needed concrete evidence. Over the following days, Eleanor and Samuel began implementing subtle countermeasures. They adjusted the placement of cameras in the hallways, installed hidden sensors near sensitive areas, and created decoy documents to test Adrian's interest. Eleanor watched him closely during meals, noting which topics triggered subtle shifts in his demeanor. Every glance toward the safe, every casual inquiry about the staff schedule, was logged and analyzed. Adrian, meanwhile, appeared outwardly unaffected. He continued his routine, attending dinners, walking through the gardens with Clara, and making idle conversation with the staff. But Eleanor noticed patterns emerging. He often asked about the family's upcoming financial plans, queried subtly about potential trips, and observed how her staff interacted with the estate's valuables. His surveillance was methodical, almost professional, yet cloaked in the guise of casual curiosity. One evening, Eleanor found herself walking alone along the estate's perimeter, the wind rustling through the trees. She paused at a small hill overlooking the main gate and driveway. The moonlight cast long shadows and the manor below looked peaceful, almost innocent. Yet she knew better. Adrian's intentions were far from innocent. She had to be smarter, faster, more vigilant than he could anticipate. Her phone buzzed with a message from Samuel. "He's asking about the safe code. Be careful." Eleanor's pulse quickened. Adrian had already discovered part of the manor's most guarded secret. He was probing, testing boundaries, and calculating the perfect moment to strike. The realization settled over her like ice. She couldn't allow him to get close, not to the documents, not to the assets, and certainly not to Clara. Returning to the manor, Eleanor convened a quiet meeting with Samuel. They strategized for hours, mapping Adrian's routines, predicting his next moves, and planning contingencies. They decided to introduce subtle psychological pressure, planting hints of scrutiny, creating moments where Adrian might reveal his intentions inadvertently, and preparing Clara for careful observation without revealing the full danger. As Eleanor prepared to retire for the night, she paused at the study door, hand resting lightly on the knob. Beyond it lay her life's work, her daughter's future, and the wealth Adrian sought to claim. She could feel the tension in the walls, the echo of Adrian's steps, the shadow of his ambition creeping through her home. She knew that the battle ahead would not be won by charm or confrontation alone. It would require vigilance, cunning, and patience. And Eleanor Hartwell had all three in abundance. For the first time in her life, she embraced the night with quiet determination. Adrian was surveying her estate. He thought he was the hunter. But in Silverwood Manor, the hunter would soon find himself the prey. The manor was quiet, yet Eleanor felt the tension in the walls like a living thing. Each creak of the floorboards, each rustle of the curtains, seemed amplified in the silence. Adrian had been careful, methodical, and observant, but Eleanor was no ordinary matron. She had spent decades navigating the treacherous waters of wealth, society, and human ambition. Tonight she intended to turn the tide. She moved through the study, reviewing her plan one last time. The documents Adrian had been most interested in, trust papers, financial statements, and the code to the safe, were not as vulnerable as they appeared. Eleanor had replaced them with duplicates, carefully crafted decoys filled with false information. Every paper, every ledger, every file was a test designed to reveal Adrian's true intentions. Samuel Rourke, her long-trusted investigator, was already in position, hidden in the shadows near the study's adjoining room. The security cameras Eleanor had installed in recent days fed directly into his laptop, allowing him to observe Adrian without alerting him. Clara, blissfully unaware of the danger her fiancé posed, had retired to her room. Eleanor knew she couldn't expose Adrian's deceit to her daughter just yet. The revelation had to be timed perfectly to ensure both her safety and emotional stability. Adrian entered the study quietly, as if drawn by an invisible magnet. He paused at the door, scanning the room with calculated care. Eleanor, seated at her desk, feigned reading a letter, her eyes barely lifting. She allowed herself the luxury of a small inward smile. Adrian's hand hovered over the top of the desk, brushing lightly against one of the decoy ledgers. His eyes flicked toward Eleanor. "You seem busy tonight," he said smoothly. Eleanor looked up slowly, allowing the smallest hint of curiosity in her gaze. "Just reviewing some old documents. So many details to keep track of, Adrian. It's easy to lose sight of what matters." Adrian's lips curved into a subtle, confident smile. I'd be happy to help. Perhaps I can assist. Perhaps, Eleanor replied, her tone deliberately neutral. She knew better than to allow him to perceive eagerness or distrust. Her expression remained calm, yet every muscle in her body was alert. Adrian picked up one of the ledgers and began flipping through it. His eyes darted rapidly across the pages. Eleanor pretended to write notes, her pen scratching across blank sheets, though she was keenly watching every twitch of his expression. It happened almost imperceptibly. A slight narrowing of his eyes, a quick glance toward the safe's location, and a barely audible whisper of impatience. Eleanor's heart quickened. He was taking the bait. I don't mean to pry, Adrian said casually, but some of these accounts, they're very detailed. Must take a great deal of work to manage them all. Eleanor looked up sharply. They are important, Adrian. Very important. That's why I keep them secure. A shadow crossed his face, a hint of desire quickly masked by his usual charm. Of course, he said, placing the ledger back on the desk. I just admire diligence. Eleanor let the comment pass. It was exactly the distraction she needed. Slowly she stood, placing a deliberate footstep closer to the hidden trapdoor that concealed the real safe. The decoy ledger remained on the desk, perfectly positioned. Adrian followed, subtly, almost instinctively. Eleanor could feel his attention shifting entirely to her movements. She knew he was calculating, measuring, and scheming. Would you like a closer look? She asked softly, gesturing toward the secured area. Adrian's eyes flickered with barely concealed excitement. If you don't mind showing me, he said, his voice smooth but tinged with eagerness. Eleanor moved toward the safe, slowly, deliberately, giving the impression of carelessness while guiding him toward the trap. She knew he would attempt to access it, believing her distracted. Just as he reached for the edge of the hidden trapdoor, Samuel, unseen by Adrian, pressed a button on his tablet. A soft click echoed in the room, a barely perceptible sound, yet enough to trigger the first stage of Eleanor's trap. The ledgers on the desk flipped open suddenly, revealing a hidden camera positioned to capture Adrian's face as he attempted to touch the safe. A silent alarm, transmitted directly to Eleanor's phone, confirmed Samuel was recording. Adrian froze, his hand hovering over the trapdoor. He glanced around quickly, realizing the room had changed subtly. Eleanor's eyes met his, unwavering, almost cold in their intensity. You've been very busy, haven't you? She said, voice calm, but carrying an unmistakable edge. Adrian's face paled slightly, his composure slipping for the first time in weeks. I was merely curious, he stammered. Eleanor's gaze sharpened. Curiosity can be dangerous, Adrian. Especially when it involves other people's property. He tried to regain his charm, forcing a smile. I assure you, Mrs. Hartwell, I meant no harm. Really? Eleanor asked, tilting her head. Because curiosity sometimes disguises itself as greed. And greed can be very revealing. Adrian's jaw tightened. He realized the trap had been laid specifically for him. Every step, every glance, every gesture had been anticipated. I don't understand, he said cautiously, though his eyes betrayed panic. You understand perfectly, Eleanor replied. You've been under surveillance, Adrian. Every move you made, every question you asked about the estate, every interest you feigned in Clara's life and our family's finances, all recorded. The color drained from his face. You've been watching me. Yes, Eleanor said simply. And now I know your intentions. Attempting to access the estate's assets before the wedding, testing the security, probing for weaknesses. It's all been documented. Adrian's hands trembled slightly, his carefully constructed mask of confidence falling away. You can't do this, he muttered. Clara, she'll never believe you. Eleanor smiled faintly, a predator finally revealing herself. You underestimate her, Adrian. And you underestimated me. This ends tonight. At that moment, Samuel stepped out from the shadows, holding the tablet with the recorded footage. Adrian's eyes widened as he realized the depth of Eleanor's preparation. You've been very clever, Adrian said, attempting to regain composure. But cleverness alone won't save you. It's not cleverness, Eleanor replied evenly. It's experience. And it's justice. Adrian hesitated, calculating his next move. Eleanor could see the mental gears turning, the plans he had made and the sudden realization that none of them would work. The trap was set, the evidence undeniable and escape impossible without exposure. Finally, with a reluctant, bitter smile, he straightened. Perhaps this isn't over. Eleanor didn't flinch. It is for now. And when it truly ends, Adrian, you will regret ever underestimating this family. Adrian left the study without another word, his polished charm replaced by a simmering, unspoken threat. Eleanor closed the trapdoor carefully, her heart steady. Samuel placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You caught him, he said quietly. Yes, Eleanor replied. But he's not finished. Adrian Hale, or whatever his name truly is, has plans. And they are dangerous. We've won a battle tonight. But the war is far from over. The manor returned to silence, the glow from the fireplace casting long shadows across the walls. Eleanor knew Adrian would not stop. He would try again, perhaps more subtly, perhaps more ruthlessly. But now she had the advantage. The hunter had stepped into the trap. And in Silverwood Manor, Eleanor Hartwell had shown she could be an even deadlier predator. Tomorrow the next phase would begin. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Clara's bedroom, painting the walls with soft golden stripes. For the first time in weeks, she awoke not with excitement for the wedding preparations, but with a strange, uneasy heaviness pressing on her chest. Something had shifted, a subtle disturbance in the perfect rhythm of her life. She had always trusted Adrian. How could she not? He was charming, attentive, and always so considerate. But lately she had noticed small inconsistencies, fleeting moments that didn't fit the picture. A whispered phone call she wasn't meant to hear, a shadow lingering too long near her mother's study, and then last night. Adrian had seemed distant, distracted, as though he carried a secret just beyond reach. Clara dressed slowly, letting her mind wander back over the past few days. Her mother, Eleanor, had been unusually insistent about being vigilant, but Clara had dismissed it as overprotectiveness. After all, Eleanor was prone to caution, always calculating risks. Yet a tiny, persistent whisper in Clara's mind suggested this time perhaps her mother's instincts were right. Downstairs, the manor was alive with its usual morning bustle. Staff moved quietly, aware of Eleanor's heightened tension but unaware of the underlying threat. The kitchen smelled of freshly baked bread and brewed coffee, a comforting aroma, yet Clara found herself unsettled. Eleanor entered the room as Clara poured herself tea. Her mother's expression, calm yet intense, seemed sharper than usual. Good morning, Clara, Eleanor said softly, her eyes meeting her daughter's with a weight that made Clara pause. Morning, mother. You seem serious, Clara replied, trying to mask the flutter of anxiety in her chest. I have things to tell you, Eleanor said carefully, taking a seat at the table. About Adrian. Clara froze, tea halfway to her lips. The name sounded ordinary, but in the tone her mother used, it carried a warning. What about him? Clara asked, her voice steady but cautious. Eleanor sighed, leaning back, collecting her thoughts. Clara, I've known Adrian for some time now. Long enough to observe him closely. He is not who he claims to be. Clara's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? She asked, setting the cup down. Adrian is here for one reason, Eleanor continued, her voice measured. Your happiness is irrelevant to him. His eyes are on the estate, the wealth, everything I have worked for. He is calculating, manipulative, and dangerous. Clara felt a cold wave rush through her. She shook her head. No, that's impossible. He's perfect. He's been kind, attentive, loving. Yes, that is his skill, Eleanor replied gently but firmly. He masks his intentions with charm and attentiveness. He wants you to believe he loves you. But his love is a lie. A performance. Clara's mind raced. Pieces of the past weeks slid into place. Adrian's subtle questions about her mother's schedule, his sudden interest in the estate, the way he lingered near the study, the moments he seemed to scan every corner of the house as if memorizing it. She had dismissed them as quirks, harmless curiosity. Now, under Eleanor's words, they became something far more sinister. Mother, are you sure? Clara asked, her voice trembling. I have proof, Eleanor said. She stood and gestured for Clara to follow her to the study. There Samuel waited, laptop open, displaying video footage. Clara's eyes widened as she saw Adrian, unguarded, handling the decoy ledgers, testing the hidden trapdoor, unaware he was being observed. Is this real? Clara whispered, her hand trembling as it hovered near the screen. It is, Eleanor replied, watching her daughter closely. And it's only a fraction of what we've documented. Every action he took, every attempt to probe the estate has been recorded. Adrian's intentions are clear. Clara sank into a chair, feeling the weight of betrayal settle over her. The man she had trusted, the man she had dreamed of marrying, had been orchestrating a plan to deceive her, to steal from her family, and to manipulate her love for his own gain. I can't believe it, she said, voice breaking. I loved him. I thought he loved me. Eleanor knelt beside her, placing a hand gently on Clara's shoulder. It's not your fault, Clara. He is a master manipulator. He played on your trust and your kindness. But now you know. And knowledge is power. You can choose how this ends. Clara's mind shifted from shock to anger. Her eyes narrowed, determination replacing despair. We can't let him get away with this, she said. Not him, not anyone. No, Eleanor agreed. We won't. But we have to be careful. Adrian is clever and ruthless. He will try another move, perhaps more subtle, perhaps more dangerous. We must anticipate him and act before he can strike again. Clara nodded, feeling the first spark of resolve. What do we do? Eleanor smiled faintly. We observe, we plan, and we prepare. He thinks he has control, but from now on he will be reacting to us. The next time he makes a move, we will catch him red-handed. And this time there will be no doubt, no escape. For the first time, Clara felt a sense of purpose. The vulnerability she had felt was replaced by focus. She realized that love could be blinded by appearances, but clarity and vigilance could expose deception. She would no longer be a passive participant in her own life. Over the next few days, Clara began to observe Adrian herself, under her mother's guidance. She noticed the subtleties Eleanor had pointed out, the way he lingered near valuable areas, the hidden eagerness behind his polite inquiries, the fleeting glances that betrayed calculation. Each observation, each small confirmation of suspicion, steeled her resolve. One evening, Clara confronted Adrian quietly in the garden. Adrian, I need to ask you something, she began, her voice calm but firm. Why do you ask so many questions about the manor? About my mother's finances? About her schedules? Adrian froze, the practiced charm faltering for the first time. Clara, you don't get to lie to me, she said, her gaze sharp, unwavering. I know you've been planning something. I don't know exactly what yet, but I will find out. And I won't let you hurt my family or me. Adrian's jaw tightened. For a moment he seemed trapped, caught between concealing his intentions and facing the consequences. Clara felt a rush of empowerment, realizing that the fear she had felt was replaced by the clarity of action. You are clever, Adrian said finally, his voice low. But you have no idea what you're up against. Maybe, Clara replied evenly. But I'm not afraid anymore. Not of you and not of what comes next. That night, as Clara returned to her room, she felt the transformation settle within her. She was no longer the trusting, naive fiancée. She was a vigilant daughter, a strategic ally to her mother, and a force to be reckoned with. The awakening was painful, but it was necessary. She understood now that Adrian's charm was a weapon, and she would learn to counter it. In Silverwood Manor, the stakes had shifted. Adrian, confident in his deception, now faced the unexpected. A daughter who would not be fooled, a mother who would not relent, and a household prepared to defend its treasures. Tomorrow would mark a new phase in the struggle, one where cunning, courage, and strategy would define the outcome. Clara was awake, aware, and ready. And the predator's plans would have to face the consequences of a vigilant family united against him. The manor was unusually still that evening, as if even the walls themselves sensed the tension that filled the air. Every hallway, every room, seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable clash between truth and deception. Eleanor, Clara, and Samuel had spent the day meticulously planning. Adrian believed himself in control, unaware that every move he had made over the past weeks had been anticipated, observed, and documented. Tonight the trap would be complete, Clara stood by the grand staircase, her posture rigid yet poised, her mind focused and clear. The naivety of the past weeks had vanished, replaced by vigilance and resolve. She had rehearsed her words, her questions and her responses, ensuring that Adrian could no longer charm or manipulate her. Eleanor entered the room, radiating a calm authority that contrasted sharply with Adrian's confident but fragile bravado. "It's time," she said softly. Samuel, stationed discreetly nearby with his tablet and cameras, nodded. "Everything is ready. The evidence is all here. Once this begins, there's no turning back." Clara's hands tightened on the banister. "I'm ready," she said firmly. A knock echoed through the hallway. Adrian stepped into the foyer, his usual smile in place, though there was a subtle tension in his posture that betrayed him. "Good evening, ladies," he said smoothly. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." Eleanor's eyes locked on his, steady and unyielding. "Adrian, please step into the study," she said calmly. "We need to have a serious conversation." Adrian's brow furrowed slightly, suspicion creeping in, but he followed, masking it with polite curiosity. Clara trailed behind, keeping a watchful eye, while Samuel remained hidden, ready to record every word and gesture. Inside the study, the atmosphere was charged. Eleanor closed the door behind them and gestured for Adrian to sit. "Please," she said, voice soft but commanding. "Sit." Adrian obliged, though his confidence seemed slightly shaken. "I assume this is about the estate," he said cautiously, glancing at Eleanor. "Or perhaps my relationship with your daughter." "It's about both," Eleanor replied evenly. "And about your intentions, Adrian. We've observed your actions for some time now. Everything you've done, every question, every attempt to access information, every effort to manipulate has been documented." Adrian's eyes flickered with a mixture of anger and surprise, though he quickly masked it. "I don't know what you mean," he said, voice smooth but guarded. Clara stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. "Don't lie to us, Adrian. I know what you've been planning. I've seen the subtle ways you've tried to manipulate me, to probe for weaknesses in this family. It ends tonight." Adrian's composure faltered for a fraction of a second, a fleeting crack in his mask. You can't possibly know everything," he said, attempting to regain control. "You do not realize how thorough we've been," Eleanor said. She gestured to Samuel, who emerged from his hiding spot, holding the tablet that contained hours of footage and recordings. "Every move, every intention, every deceitful act, captured here. Adrian, the evidence is undeniable." Adrian's eyes widened as he saw the tablet. For a moment he seemed paralyzed, realizing the depth of Eleanor and Clara's preparation. He forced a smile, though it no longer reached his eyes. "And what, you intend to confront me with this? What will that accomplish?" Clara's voice was sharp, unwavering. "It accomplishes the truth, Adrian. The truth that you cannot hide, no matter how charming or clever you believe yourself to be. You will not manipulate or steal from this family." Adrian's jaw tightened. I did not mean to hurt anyone. My intentions were practical. I needed security, stability, financial stability." "You mean your greed," Eleanor interrupted coldly. "You sought to exploit my trust and my daughter's love for your gain. That is not practical, it is criminal." Adrian's expression darkened, and for the first time his charm gave way to desperation. "You have no proof that could hold up. Even if you show me these recordings, what will they prove? Affection, interest, curiosity, these are not crimes." Clara stepped closer, her eyes burning with determination. "They're not just interest or curiosity. They're evidence of deception, manipulation, and intent to steal. You tested our security, probed for weaknesses, and attempted to access property that was not yours. That is not love. That is theft." Adrian's breathing quickened. He realized that no charm, no lie, no plea could erase the damning footage. Eleanor's calm authority and Clara's awakened vigilance had dismantled every advantage he had believed he held. "You don't understand," Adrian said, his voice lowering, edged with frustration. "I could have had it all. Wealth, influence, a future secured. And at the cost of betraying your fiancée and her family," Eleanor said sharply. "You underestimated us, Adrian. You underestimated Clara. That is your true mistake." Samuel pressed a button on the tablet and the footage played on the large monitor in the study. Adrian watched in stunned silence as his every calculated move, his probing questions, and his attempts to access the estate were displayed. Clara watched as the man she had loved was revealed in his true colors. A manipulator, a liar, and a fraud. "You set me up," he spat finally, anger and disbelief colliding. "No," Clara said, voice steady and controlled. "You revealed yourself. You made your choices. We simply recorded the truth." Adrian looked around the room, calculating, searching for an escape but found none. His usual confidence had evaporated, replaced by the stark realization that the family he had sought to deceive had outmaneuvered him. "You think you've won," he said finally, his voice low and dangerous, "but you have no idea what I'm capable of." Eleanor's gaze was unwavering. "We do not need to imagine, Adrian. We have seen it. And we are prepared. You will not succeed. Not here, not with this family." Clara stepped closer, her presence strong and commanding. "Your charm, your lies, your manipulation, they end tonight. You will leave this house and you will never threaten us again. If you value your freedom, you will leave peacefully. If not, the authorities will ensure justice is done." Adrian's face twisted with rage and frustration. He knew he had been cornered, trapped by a family whose intelligence, vigilance, and courage far surpassed his own underestimation. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he realized the futility of resistance. After a tense pause, he straightened, his mask of arrogance returning just enough to maintain dignity. "This isn't over," he said, his voice cold. "You may have won tonight, but the world is large and opportunities are endless." Eleanor's eyes did not waver. "Perhaps. But Silverwood Manor is not yours. And you will never touch what belongs to this family." Adrian's lips pressed into a thin line. Without another word, he turned and left the study, his departure silent but charged with unspoken threats. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving a heavy silence in the room. Clara exhaled deeply, relief mixing with lingering anger. Eleanor placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder, pride and reassurance in her eyes. "You did well, Clara. You faced the truth and you stood firm. That is the most important victory of all." Clara nodded, feeling a weight lift from her chest. "It's over, for now," she said, though the words carried a cautious edge. "Yes," Eleanor agreed. "For now. But we remain vigilant. Adrian Hale, or whatever his real name is, may return in some form. But tonight he faced the strength of a family united and he lost." The manor, once tense and foreboding, seemed to exhale with them. The walls no longer whispered unease. They reflected triumph, resilience, and the unwavering bond between mother and daughter. Clara understood now that love could blind, but courage and awareness could illuminate the truth. And as she looked at Eleanor, she realized that together, they were unstoppable. Outside, the last rays of sunlight touched the manor's stone facade. Inside, Silverwood Manor was a fortress, not just of wealth but of loyalty, vigilance, and unshakable strength. And Adrian Hale, the charming predator, had finally been exposed. The first light of morning spilled over Silverwood Manor, brushing the estate's stone walls with a soft, golden glow. The tension that had gripped the household for weeks had finally lifted, replaced by a sense of peace and renewed purpose. Clara stood at the balcony, looking out over the sprawling gardens, the dew-kissed roses reflecting the sunlight like tiny jewels. She breathed deeply, savoring the serenity. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she felt free. The ordeal with Adrian Hale had left scars, but it had also left lessons. Lessons about trust, vigilance, and the strength that came from facing harsh truths. Clara's awakening in recent weeks had transformed her from a naive young woman into a determined, capable force. She had seen deception, experienced betrayal, and yet emerged stronger, wiser, and more self-assured. Eleanor joined her at the balcony, her presence a grounding force. She placed a hand on Clara's shoulder, warm and reassuring. "It's peaceful this morning, isn't it?" she said softly, her eyes following the same horizon. "Yes," Clara replied, a small smile playing on her lips. "And it feels like the first day of something new. Not just after Adrian, but for me, for us." Eleanor nodded, her eyes reflecting both pride and relief. "You've grown in ways I could have only hoped for. Strong, courageous, and wise beyond your years. Adrian underestimated you and the family, but you didn't falter. That is something to honor. Clara looked down at her hands, which trembled slightly at the memory of the confrontation, but now held a sense of calm purpose. It's strange, she said. I thought losing Adrian, or discovering the truth, would feel devastating. Vincent, feel empowered. Like I finally understand who I am and what I'm capable of. That is your gift, Eleanor replied. The world will try to deceive, manipulate, or tempt you, Clara. But the strength you've discovered will guide you through anything. And Silverwood Manor will always be a place where truth, vigilance, and love reign. The morning carried on quietly, filled with small acts of renewal. The staff moved about cheerfully, carrying out their duties with lighter hearts. Samuel, ever diligent, checked the estate's new security measures and smiled with satisfaction, knowing the family was now prepared for any future threat. Clara wandered through the manor's corridors, touching familiar surfaces. The carved banisters, the polished floors, the shelves lined with books and memories. She realized that this estate was more than just wealth or property. It was a repository of her family's history, love, and resilience. Protecting it had become a mission, and she felt an unexpected thrill at being entrusted with such responsibility. By mid-morning, the family gathered in the sunroom for breakfast. Eleanor, Clara, and Samuel sat together, enjoying the warmth of the sunlight pouring through the tall windows. There was no tension, no lingering fear, only relief and a shared sense of victory. Clara, Eleanor said, raising her teacup, to new beginnings. To new beginnings, Clara echoed, clinking her cup gently against her mother's. She felt a weight lift further from her shoulders. The past, with its deceit and danger, had passed. Now came a future filled with possibilities, shaped not by someone else's schemes, but by her own choices. After breakfast, Clara returned to her room and began organizing her thoughts. She wrote in her journal, reflecting on everything that had happened. Adrian's betrayal, the investigation, the confrontation. It all seemed surreal, like chapters from a story she had lived in vivid detail. She wrote about her awakening, about the courage she had discovered within herself, and about the family that had stood united beside her. As she wrote, she realized that the experience had changed more than just her perspective on love and trust. It had given her a clarity about her future. She would not rush into another relationship, nor would she allow herself to be swayed by charm alone. She had learned to value honesty, loyalty, and mutual respect above all else. Later that afternoon, Clara and Eleanor walked through the gardens together. The air was filled with the scent of blooming flowers and birds sang in the trees. It felt like a world untouched by the deceit that had recently threatened it. "Mother," Clara said, pausing by a rosebush, "I want to help you manage the estate more actively. Not just the finances but the decisions, the planning, the everything. I want to be fully prepared for anything in the future." Eleanor smiled, a mixture of pride and affection in her eyes. "That is exactly the kind of determination and foresight that will keep this family safe, Clara. You have the heart, the mind, and the courage to do more than simply inherit a name. You can protect and grow it in ways even I could not imagine." Clara felt a surge of purpose. She understood now that power and responsibility were inseparable, and that vigilance did not mean fear. It meant preparedness, wisdom, and the courage to act decisively. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the gardens, Clara paused and looked toward the distant horizon. Adrian was gone for now, removed from their lives, but she knew the lesson would remain. Trust must be earned, vigilance must be constant, and courage must never falter. That evening the manor seemed alive with renewal. Lights glimmered in the windows, laughter floated from the sunroom, and the family's bond was stronger than ever. Silverwood Manor was no longer just a home. It was a fortress of love, wisdom, and resilience. Clara felt the full weight, and the full freedom, of that truth. She retired to her room before nightfall, reflecting on how much had changed. She had survived deceit, uncovered betrayal, and faced danger without flinching. And in doing so she had discovered a depth of strength she had never known she possessed. As she gazed out her window at the stars beginning to twinkle in the evening sky, Clara whispered quietly to herself, "This is only the beginning." For she knew that life, with all its uncertainties, would always present challenges. But with courage, clarity, and the unwavering support of those she loved, She could face anything. Silverwood Manor was secure, her family was safe, and her own spirit was unshakable. Later that afternoon, Clara and Eleanor walked through the gardens together. The air was filled with the scent of blooming flowers and birds sang in the trees. It felt like a world untouched by the deceit that had recently threatened it. "Mother," Clara said, pausing by a rosebush, "I want to help you manage the estate more actively. Not just the finances but the decisions, the planning, everything. I want to be fully prepared for anything in the future." Eleanor smiled, a mixture of pride and affection in her eyes. "That is exactly the kind of determination and foresight that will keep this family safe, Clara. You have the heart, the mind, and the courage to do more than simply inherit a name. You can protect and grow it in ways even I could not imagine." Clara felt a surge of purpose. She understood now that power and responsibility were inseparable, and that vigilance did not mean fear. It meant preparedness, wisdom, and the courage to act decisively. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the gardens, Clara paused and looked toward the distant horizon. Adrian was gone for now, removed from their lives, but she knew the lesson would remain. Trust must be earned, vigilance must be constant, and courage must never falter. That evening the manor seemed alive with renewal. Lights glimmered in the windows, laughter floated from the sunroom, and the family's bond was stronger than ever. Silverwood Manor was no longer just a home. It was a fortress of love, wisdom, and resilience. Clara felt the full weight, and the full freedom, of that truth. She retired to her room before nightfall, reflecting on how much had changed. She had survived deceit, uncovered betrayal, and faced danger without flinching. And in doing so she had discovered a depth of strength she had never known she possessed. As she gazed out her window at the stars beginning to twinkle in the evening sky, Clara whispered quietly to herself, "This is only the beginning." For she knew that life, with all its uncertainties, would always present challenges. But with courage, clarity, and the unwavering support of those she loved, she could face anything. Silverwood Manor was secure, her family was safe, and her own spirit was unshakable.
Our story ends here. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you have a story or a personal experience you want to share, you can write it in the comments. Maybe your story will be the one we tell in the next video. See you in the next episode.